the reality is that the seeking of knowledge is an obligation upon everyone who is considered to be an adult in that way. Anyone above, say, let's say 15 years old onwards, approximately, they have to learn the basic knowledge, and we call this fard al-ain, which is essentially the individual obligated knowledge. So I think the thing is that we place restrictions on ourselves naturally, right? And I think that one thing you'll find is that once you start to remove those, like you see this guy and I saw something on Instagram, a 70-year-old doing weights in the gym, right? And you look really strong. If you want to do it, you'll do it.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome to the Al-Ma'rifah Foundation podcast. We are joined today by Shaykh Rehan Salim, and we're very happy to have him. Shaykh Rehan Salim has a postgraduate in international development from the University of Manchester. He pursued Arabic and Islamic studies in Egypt and has studied under esteemed scholars such as Shaykh Ahmed, and has later continued his studies in Saudi Arabia, focusing on Shafi'i fiqh and hadith. He also holds a BA in Islamic law from Imam Muhammad University in Riyadh. Shaykh Rehan, thank you for being with us today. First and foremost, Shaykh, with using this terminology of seeking knowledge or being a student of knowledge, what does that mean exactly? Is there a criteria for it? What makes someone a student of knowledge?
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim tasliman kathira. So I think one of the things especially with this podcast and generally with the concept of knowledge, is that it's important that we realize that knowledge in and of itself is one of the prerequisites, especially in our tradition. And I think especially for whether it's professionals, people at university, youngsters, uncles, aunties, knowledge is something which is a precursor for all the ibadat and the worship that we do. Allah Azza wa Jalla says, فَعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ, that know that there is none worthy of worship except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so the scholar said about this that knowledge is a prerequisite for any action. And really you can't drive a car, you can't do anything which is of complication without knowing how to do it. The same way with the prayer, you have to learn the prerequisites of the prayer. You have to learn how to pray, what to do when you have made a mistake. Likewise, wudu, making it valid versus invalid. So these are all things which knowledge is extremely important. And of course, even outside of worship, knowledge of how we deal with as communities, there's politics, there's ilm dunya, which is the knowledge of the temporal world as well, biology, chemistry. These are all things which really move communities together. And so from that perspective, knowledge is extremely important.
Mm-hmm. And so, someone could then reply to you and say, well, that's all well and good. We have shuyukh, we have scholars, teachers, someone on the street, is it incumbent upon them to seek knowledge in an Islamic sense? Yeah,
so, this is an important point, and this is something, especially Al-Ma'rifah, we're trying to kind of inculcate in people, that the reality is that the seeking of knowledge is an obligation upon everyone who is considered to be an adult in that way. Anyone above, say, let's say 15 years old onwards, approximately, they have to learn the basic knowledge, and we call this fard al-ain, which is essentially the individual obligated knowledge. And so, like I said before, and we're trying to push this because really, fard al-ain basically means your individual obligated knowledge that you must know, and if you do not learn it, then you'll be sinful, right? And so, from my perspective, what we found is that there's kind of three main areas that people need to learn about. One is essentially Aqidah, which is your belief system, the basics of the faith. So whether it's belief about Allah, about the angels, it doesn't have to be too technical, but everyone needs to know that as a prerequisite, right? Everyone does. The second would be how to do your worship. So again, the concept of prayer, wudu, how to give zakah, calculate zakah, if you have money, to how to go on hajj. So these are all things that I need to know. We could put this under fiqh, which is essentially jurisprudence. But within jurisprudence as well, there are other elements which are also important. So for example, if you are involved in trade, then you need to learn the rules of trade. Ibn Umar used to go in the marketplaces and he would expel anyone who did not know the rules of trade from the market, because you can involve yourself in haram. Likewise, someone who's married, they need to know the rules of marriage in terms of itself, nikah and divorce. The amount of people who we get calls, myself and Imam Abid and others, that have I actually divorced my wife? Because they've said the words, I've divorced you, but in what context did they say it? They didn't know the rules. Some people have come, subhanAllah, and they've said, I've actually divorced my wife completely, talaq baynuna, which is the complete divorce, but they didn't know. So these are things which are individual obligated knowledge, which everyone needs to know. I think the final one, which again is important, is how to recite the Quran. So we call this tajweed. And so essentially the correct articulation of the Quran, its letters, not making any mistakes. We used to say that people say qalb, which is heart, but if you say kalb, it means dog, right? So if you say the wrong letter, you change the whole meaning, especially Surah Al-Fatiha is important. So my advice for people, like I said, university students, professionals, people who work in banks, people who work in the pharmacists, everyone needs to at least learn this basic knowledge in order to fulfill what is required of the deen.
Yeah. So you don't see it as mutually exclusive then for someone to be, knowledgeable in, like you say, pharmacy, for example, or something worldly or secular, but also have one foot in the Islamic sciences.
Yeah, I think the issue is, Muhammad, is that I think we tend to think to ourselves that when we say seek knowledge, people just think of shari'i or religious knowledge, right? And Imam Shafi, he said al-ilm ilman, that there's two types of ilm. He said ilm ad-dunya wa ilm ad-din, which essentially is knowledge of the world and knowledge of the sharia, right, of the Islamic law. And so from his perspective, he was talking specifically about fiqh and medicine, but many of the scholars understood that actually it just refers to anything which is secular versus religious. And they're all beneficial, right? They're all things which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded that we should do. When we think about, and this is an important point, why do we say religion is important? Is because actually, education or learning is important, is because the religion and education of the religion specifically is a protection of the deen intellectually. The same way that people who fight for the sake of Allah, they protect the deen physically. In the Quran, there are so many ayat which talk about the people who are the scholars, as well as those who fight for the sake of Allah, that they have a very high status. يَرْفَعِ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مِنْكُمْ وَالَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْعِلْمَ دَرَجَاتٍ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raises those above you, those who have those who have learnt and those who have been given knowledge. And so this is something which we find that we should do. And the reality is that anyone who seeks any form of knowledge, they're fulfilling one of the maqasid, the objectives of the Sharia, which is objectives of this particular Islamic law, which is the protection of the intellect. So there's 5 objectives of the Sharia. Everything we do in the Sharia, all the commandments, all the prohibitions fall under 5. The protection of the religion, protection of life, protection of intellect, protection of lineage, protection of property. And so by learning knowledge, you're protecting your intellect. And that's why the Sharia says that learn the knowledge. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Talab al-ilm farid ala kulli muslim wa muslima," that seeking knowledge is an obligation on every Muslim and Muslima. And so because you're spreading that knowledge, you're helping others, you're building civilizations. Ibn Khaldun talks about this in his Muqaddimah. At the same time, it prohibits alcohol and drugs because they cloud the mind. And so the point being is that we shouldn't think to ourselves that just religious knowledge is the only knowledge that we should be learning. If you're involved in pharmacy, if you're an engineer, if you're in medicine, these are all beneficial knowledge. The crux though here is that whilst you should study both, there is a grade higher for religious knowledge. There's no doubt about that, because that's what brings you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And essentially that's what we're trying to do being in this dunya.
Jazakallah khair. And so what does that look like, in the modern sense in the UK or in the West in the 21st century? Someone's already, 9 to 5 job, maybe some kids at home, the weekends at the family. How are they supposed to take on a course?
Yeah, you tell me, Muhammad.
Well, subhanAllah, I think this is why it's important to define what we mean by seeking knowledge. It doesn't necessarily mean that you take a hiatus and go to a different country necessarily, or it doesn't have to be anything too intensive. I think it's important to know that small and consistent is the key idea there, that even maybe just a couple of hours a week at a regular course, for example, a regular lesson, dars, halaqa, whatever the case may be. And a large part of it is the company you keep. And if people are going to be encouraging you towards seeking knowledge, encouraging you towards the mosque, towards these durus, then that's half the job. You don't have to come up with your own motivation necessarily. But of course, it's important to have resources around you as well. We have online now. You don't necessarily need to be close to an active mosque. Would you say that online is a good recourse?
Yeah. So, I mean, people who, of course, who study with me, they hear this a lot from me, that I think that no doubt, just coming back to your first point before this, is that the concept of going to a regular class is really important, right? So whether it's, going to someone's house, which I think is a good setting, whether it's 45 minutes going to the masjid, just one class a week, that is what you would fulfill yourself to be a student of knowledge, inshallah, right? And of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there's so much benefit and virtue of a student of knowledge in and of itself. You know, we know the hadith, the Prophet, man salaka tariqan yaltamisu fihi ilman, that whoever takes a path to seek knowledge, sahalallahu lahu tariqan ila jannah, that Allah makes it easy for him to enter Jannah. And so we should all be striving to do that. And I think the weekly dars, which is the small and continuous, like you mentioned, 100% I agree that everyone should be doing that. You set it up in your house. If it's not in your house, then go to someone's house. If it's not there, then go to the masjid. Just once a week, 45 minutes doesn't hurt. You know, people watch Netflix, they watch films left, right, and center. They go out with their friends. This is not a difficult thing to do. And so if you push yourself, you should do it. Now, if you find that you don't have that around you, then yes, I think online is good. But I would say that the physical attendance of a class is the most important for myself, because the deen was always spread and it was always communicated in a form of talaqqi, that it was heart to heart, right? And I think that's where sometimes you can be stuck online and you don't feel that you're taking that benefit there and then. There's no one checking. You know, we used to sit with our teachers, and just the way you sat, and if you were dozing off or if you were speaking, he would call you out and he would test you, and you'd say, okay, what did you understand from this? You had to be always present. You had to be ready. Mannerisms you learn from the teacher. This is all from the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The hadith Jibril, we know that Jibril alayhi salam came in the form of with a white thobe, and he sat knee to knee next to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he taught him the religion, etc. So the point being is that this is something which I think we should strive to do, and not rely too much online, but use it more as a supplementary method. Yeah.
And you've mentioned something of your own kind of experience there. I was wondering whether, let's say, something of a roadmap, if someone is already doing these courses, attending a class regularly, and they think, well, that's, you know, it's good, but it's not enough, I can still do more. What would you say is the next step for them then?
Yeah, so I think we touched upon those things which are kind of individual obligations which everyone needs to do. Yeah, so regardless who you are, like I expect anyone watching a podcast like this, themselves, their family members, their parents, it all counts for them, that they should learn some form of aqidah, fiqh, and some tajweed, right, to a minimum basis, right? Whether you do it formally, informally, it doesn't really matter, but you need to get to a minimum. I think everyone should do that, right? Now, if someone doesn't want to do more than that, then I don't think it's a major issue, right? You're fulfilling the basic foundation, that's fine. And inshallah, when we meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then inshallah it should be sufficient. But of course, people who want to do more, I see kind of two paths personally. One path is someone who wants to learn more, but they want to learn more in a way which will just help them generally in their life, and they don't mind helping their own family members, improving their own lifestyle, making sure they're getting closer to Allah. So I think in that way, finding any classes that they can do in the UK or whatever they want to do, they can go to a class on hadith, tafsir, local halaqah in the masjid, that's fine. If they want to just buy some books, read them, study online, that's fine. Do all of that in English, no issue. And inshallah, there's a benefit and the people will get rewarded accordingly, inshallah. The second path, though, I see is that for those who have a bit more himmah and a bit more kind of vigor, is that they would want to study in order that they want to be a form like a da'i, or they want to be someone who calls other people to Allah. They do want to teach other people, and that's essentially one of the main elements of seeking knowledge, is that you learn to teach, right? Essentially, you want to learn because you want to benefit the people. It's not just for yourself. So from that perspective, if someone wants to move that way, then I personally feel that in order to not get to a plateau in your knowledge, then seeking Arabic is very important, like learning Arabic. I think that one of the reasons why when we do our Arabic class, when we asked them, because we had an Arabic accelerated course, and we said to them that, you know, why are you studying Arabic? Why do you want to study? Of every single person put their hand up when we talked about the Quran, that they want to understand and know how to learn the Quran. And really anyone, every Muslim should have it in their heart that, you know what, I want to understand the deen of Allah. I remember before I went to Egypt, I went to Taraweeh, and I think this is for all of us. I went to Taraweeh and I was there for an hour and a half. This was before, you know, when it used to be long, not like the short ones we do now. And for an hour and a half, and I came out of the masjid and I said to myself, subhanAllah, you know, I don't understand what was said in that time. Of course I benefited in terms of being in the prayer, but I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't know who it was addressing, what was the lessons to be taken. And that was the impetus to go and travel. But everyone has that same thing. And so if you find that kind of fire in your heart that I want to learn about what Allah Azza wa Jalla is saying, because essentially it's a letter, it's a correspondence from Allah. then I need to take the time to learn, right? Now, you can learn now, alhamdulillah, in the UK, you can learn online, you can learn in local masajid, they all have Arabic programs. But if you want to move to that stage whereby I want to get to a stage where I'm wanting to teach the religion and feel confident, then Arabic for me is a prerequisite that you should try to do that. I'm not saying it's the only prerequisite. You can still teach without Arabic, but if you want to get to a point where you're really learning and you're doing tafsir of the Quran and you're learning and you're taking the lessons, then I think Arabic is very important. Yeah.
And so, well, would that ever be, someone might think, well, it's too late for me. You know, it's, I'm already, let's say in my 30s and my 40s,
Yeah.
I've got kids, I've got a job.
Yeah.
Is it realistic, would you say, for them to then learn Arabic or to take on the upper echelons of seeking knowledge?
So, yeah, I think the thing is that we place restrictions on ourselves naturally, right? And I think that one thing you'll find is that once you start to remove those, there's so many examples. Like you see this guy, and I saw something on Instagram, a 70-year-old doing weights in the gym, right? And he looked really strong. If you want to do it, you'll do it, right? I remember there was a story of a 65-year-old French woman, and she memorized the Quran. She was a convert, right?
SubhanAllah.
And she memorized the Quran. In our Masjid Mosque, there's one of the uncles, and he's probably in his early 80s. And I remember seeing him, and he was in the corner. He says, "I need to ask you something." And he brought me over, and he had the hadith. There's a hadith of Ali radiallahu anhu, right? It's in the Imam al-Tirmidhi's collection. And they said that it is between, many scholars said it was Hassan, it was sound in its authenticity. That Ali radiallahu anhu said to the Prophet ﷺ to the effect that I'm struggling to keep the Quran within my mind and into memorization. What do I do? And so the Prophet ﷺ gave him basically a particular dua and particular thing to say in the prayer on the Thursday night for 4 or 5 weeks consecutively. And he was to recite certain surahs in each of the rak'at. It's available online, you'll see it, and to make a specific dua, right? And then Ali radiallahu anh said, I did that, and I found that everything stayed in my mind. And so he said, I'm trying to memorize this, right? And he's 80, and he said, what did he say to me? He says, do you mind, because I'm reading the hadith and it's really small, I need it printed out so I can know what to say when I do this. I said, you're going to do it? He says, yes. And he's 80, right? The reality is, Allah Azza wa doesn't look at your necessarily the result. Kana sa'yukum mashkura, that your sa'i, your effort is what is going to be shown gratitude. That's what really is important. So you just need to strive, whether you're 60, whether you're 20, it doesn't really matter. As long as you are on that path, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you. And you know, we have in our tradition that Shaykh Izzuddin ibn Abdus Salam, he was older when he learned, right? And he's one of the masters of Usul al-Fiqh, right? He has many books on Usul al-Fiqh, in fiqh in itself. He was in hadith. Shaykh Qarafi, who's from the Shafi'is, again, he's quoted a lot especially in the madhab of Imam al-Shafi. He was very old when he started to study. Ibn Hazm, I heard something to the effect that he memorized the Quran when he was very late. So, you know, there's no restriction on that. It's about basically starting whenever you're ready and doing something continuously, and you leave the rest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Jazakallah khaira. And you made the good point that, you know, people will eventually start, I think you used the phrase learning to teach. So in terms of after a certain point when they think they've got the basics down, they have an idea of the generalities of the deen, is it suitable, is it befitting of someone who's maybe just starting on as a student of knowledge to have that intention or to want to then disseminate that knowledge as well for them?
Yeah, I think we need to, I think if we want the future of Islam to be bright in Britain, we can't depend on individual imams to be basically expecting people to come to them in the masjid and then just teach. The Prophet ﷺ, when he first started with the 6-7 people at Al-Arqam, is that he went to the house, people gathered together, he taught, and then others were taught after that. And I feel that if we want a resurgence of our Islam in the UK, everyone needs to bear that responsibility, right? A father has to bear it for his children and his wife has to do it for their children. You can bring your cousins over. You can have, for example, classes in communities. If you're doing, like, you know, even my wife went to, they saw the family members yesterday, someone was having a baby. They did a small reminder, right? Sure. 15-minute reminder. But people getting used to this and people having this shauq and this interest for knowledge is very important. And like I said, it doesn't have to be necessarily Islamic knowledge. I think Islamic knowledge is important, but any knowledge, we should have itqan and excellence in it, right? like as I mentioned, like Ibn Khaldun, for example, he was a scholar in his own right, but it was social political. He would talk about the politics of his time. He'd talk about civilizations, how they would grow, how they would fall, talking about knowledge in of itself. And as a historiographer, someone who really understood that. You have people like Ibn Sina, for example. He was known as kind of, though he was a philosopher, he was also someone who had mastered the art of medicine, right? And he had this al-Qanun fi tib, which was used for 600 years by Europe themselves, about how to do tib and medicine and things like that. So while they were in and of themselves people who were strong in the Islamic sciences, they had al-Biruni, al-Ghazali, Razi, all of these, they were polymaths essentially, right? And the point is, in our tradition, we kind of say, okay, if you're either going to be a scholar or you're going to work 9 to 5. Why can't you do both? Why can't you excel in your medicine or excel in economics, excel in any social science, for example, but you have a good grounding in Islamic knowledge as well, and you excel within your own field, whether that's in your career, but you are able to teach and learn and help others with Islamically. I think it can definitely be done by anyone and by everyone. Yeah,
absolutely. I think to an extent we've let the reverence we have for Islamic knowledge almost prevent us from taking it on, and we think we'll leave it for the shuyukh and the scholars rather than it being for everyone as it should be.
No, but do you feel that as well, though? I think you feel that there's an expectation on, ustads and teachers to be the ones that spread the knowledge and no one else should say anything. Do you feel that as an individual?
I think people are scared of making mistakes. They're scared of being called out and someone, for example, pulling them up on something they've said. So, and obviously it's out of respect for the deen.
Yeah.
They would want to say anything incorrect. So that's a good fear to have, but it shouldn't be preventative. It should be pushing them to make sure what they're saying is correct, but not to then, sit at home and close the doors and windows and isolate themselves. It should be a social conversation for everyone, as you say.
Yeah, 100%. SubhanAllah, you think that in the UK as well, people who live in the UK and to an extent in Europe, that you have the freedom. You can set up a class, you can teach whatever you want. There are places in the Middle East where you have to get ijazah, you have to get some form of permission from the government to hold a class in a masjid, for example. It used to happen in Egypt in the past, even now in places like Dubai. You're not really allowed to just set up a dars in a masjid and just start teaching whatever you want. There are certain freedoms that we have in this country, which, to be honest with you, alhamdulillah, we should be really latching on and trying to benefit from that and really spreading the deen. And the more that you do that, honestly, it's a chain reaction. Every time you teach someone something, you teach them how to recite Surah Al-Fatiha, they teach someone else, they teach their children, and it galvanizes the community. And when people have that knowledge, and as well at the same time that they hold the secular knowledge as well and they have excellence in it, that's how you raise up a community. And Ibn Khaldun talks about this, the concept of knowledge and building a civilization. That's why in our history, those, whether it was the Ottoman Empire, whether it was the Seljuks, etc., they actually invested in institutions, educational institutions that give stipends from the Baitul Mal. They would help the scholars so that they could spread this. And I think we're not giving it, alhamdulillah, we are generally, but I think at a mass level, every person should have that importance in their mind that, I want my children, I want myself to be at least at a minimum level whereby I'm consistently seeking knowledge. I think that's important.
Absolutely. And I think that to an extent, I can only really speak for myself, but the idea that, I'm already, started on a career path in, if you want to call them the secular sciences, then I can't become a full-time scholar. So if I can't get the whole thing, I may as well not start. But then we should have a himma, as you say, to actually still, even if I can get halfway there, even if I can get a quarter of the way there, affect, the circle of influence is a concept in Islam. That my family, my community, my neighborhood, my friendship circle, and then who knows, you may as well be the cause of someone else going and reaching further than you.
100%.
And maybe then on that point, just a quick insight into your own background as to how did you start that journey? Because I'm not sure if you started out on the secular path and then you pivoted, or was it always something that you were interested in?
Yeah, I think, interestingly, even myself and especially some of my colleagues and people I knew, friends, we started as usual as children going through school. And, I wasn't involved with the ISOCs that much, though I really advise people to get involved with them because I think it's really good to have that environment. But we started by going to a class once a week. That's how it started, right? And it was learning about how to read the Quran and tajweed and things like that. I remember, mashallah, Ustad Zakaria. And so we went to his house, and then from there we'd go to Shaykh Abdullah's classes, and then we'd learn from there. And that's where we learn a lot of the adab and things like that. At that point, when we started to learn for about a few years, then we realized, you know what, we want to try and learn the Arabic language. And that was the thing I was saying, that when I came out to the masjid, that's when I felt that there's something really missing, right? There's a disconnect. I'm learning, but I'm not learning the kalam and the words of Allah. And really, that's the most important thing that we should be trying to learn. So then, I went to Egypt. Of course, Imam Abid was there as well. We were there together. Went there for a few years. Then I came back, but then I went to Saudi. And then I was working. So I was working in Saudi, but I was also studying as well with some local scholars. Then I managed to, alhamdulillah, complete a degree in Sharia, right? But that was whilst I was working as well. So it was early mornings, evenings. So this is the thing, is that if you want to do it, you can. And I'm not saying I was the greatest of students. I was just about managing. But the reality is that we found time to try and do that. And then, as you know, I just came back again with the family. So I took the family to Egypt, alhamdulillah. And they really benefited the children as well, because they're like sponges at that age.
Of course.
But the point being is that I've never felt that I'd have to stop. Like from the moment when I started, I'm still trying to study something. Not as much as I'd like to, and there's people doing a lot more. But I do feel that I need to be keeping up with it, whether it's, reading a book, studying something with a teacher. I go back to my teachers, I ask them certain things. Now we're teaching, of course, in the masjid and things like that. So you have to always have that connection. It's from the cradle to the grave, isn't it? You will keep doing it. And the more you learn, the more you realize I have no knowledge. When you see some of the people, and especially in Egypt and others, what they say, what they've memorized, what they're teaching, you see the books that are out there, what's been written by, the Imam Nawawis and the Ghazalis and the Ibn Taymiyyahs and, Razi, and you think we have no knowledge whatsoever. Really, it's very humbling. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that you can't provide some form of benefit, right? There are people that don't know anything. So you can help them by teaching them a little bit about how to recite the Quran, or teaching them in the madhab of, what to do if your wudu breaks, and how you do things correctly. Everyone needs to learn something. And so if you can be a vehicle for that, that's how you become from the warathatul anbiya, which are the inheritors of the prophets, right? And I think that's where what we're trying to say to people is that you don't have to think that these people are something high, right? They say there's a hadith that ad-dunya mal'una, that the dunya is accursed, right? Except for four. One is the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that what facilitates the dhikr of Allah, the muta'allim, the one who's learning, and the scholar, the alim, right? Meaning that everything in this dunya doesn't really have much value except for things which help you to remember Allah, which facilitate the remembrance of Allah, the one who's studying, i.e. to learn about Allah, the one who's teaching, to teach about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we can all be one of these, right? We can all be one of these. But the student and the teacher holds a specific benefit, because you don't just benefit yourself, you're benefiting others. وَخَيْرُ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَنْفَعُ النَّاسِ كَمَا قَالَ الرَّسُولُ صلى الله عليه وسلم, that the best of people are those who benefit others. So everything that you teach to someone, and it goes down the chain to the next generation, to their children, to their children's children, that piece of knowledge which you teach to people, you're going to get the thawab and the ajr in the akhirah, right? And so it just makes sense that the more you try and spend in this endeavor of seeking knowledge and teaching it, it's an investment you're never going to lose on. That's essentially what it is.
Absolutely. And I think that's a major opportunity that people shouldn't miss out on, is that even if someone isn't able for whatever reason to seize upon these opportunities, they can facilitate it for others. They can pay for someone to become a student, or even if they have a child, they can take that child to learn in the madrasa and to get them started on that journey from early on. And then, inshallah, they can receive the reward of facilitating that as well. And we never know where we'll end up. As you said, you started this Quran class when you were younger, and I'm not sure if you know at that time where you would end up, but
you don't know where you're going, what's going on. It just happens, and you're led back that way. But I think that there's no doubt that even if, like you said, you're encouraging your children, encouraging those around you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does facilitate things, and He helps you. And every time you do something good, if you do it something well and good, you do it for the sake of Allah, then Allah opens another door of goodness for you. That's how it is. And that's one of the signs of acceptance generally, that if you do a good thing and it's a good deed, and you find that you're doing another good deed, and you find you're doing another good deed, it's because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is guiding you that way, right? And so I mean, there's things that I wish I'd done, and there's a lot of, I don't want to use the word regrets. There are things that I could have done better, etc. But we are where we are, right? You just got to take each day as it comes. You can't dwell too much what happens. That's what I'm saying. If you're 50 years old and you don't know how to recite Surah Al-Fatiha, don't beat yourself up over it. It's happened, right? But what you can do right now is you can say, I'm going to take the time to try and learn, right? And if you start learning and Allah Azza wa Jalla takes your soul in that time, at least you are on that path. Otherwise, you might find by 60 you've memorized 3-4 juz. You don't know, isn't it, right? But you've got to start somewhere. So I think people shouldn't restrict themselves at all. You look at yourself today, you say, what's gone is gone, and I'm going to try and do what I can do from now on. And tawakkal ala Allah, and Allah Azza wa Jalla will open the doors for whom He wills.
Yes. And well, you've mentioned that it might be a good idea just to take some quick pointers and tips from you. Then you said some things that maybe common pitfalls that people fall into at the first steps of their journey into seeking knowledge, anything to avoid, anything to focus on.
Yeah, I think that, we have a tendency that we fall into this trap sometimes of thinking that, I'm going to listen to this person, and you go look online and you see these debates and munadharat and all of these things, and you think, oh no, this person's he's done bid'ah, and this person's this, and I shouldn't listen to him, etc. And I think the problem is that you should be open at the beginning generally. Just find someone you trust, right? Whether it's a teacher at your local masjid, it doesn't have to be a big sheikh, and he's got all these ijazat and these certificates. Just find someone you trust, and you just spend time with them once a week. Spend time with them. Don't get caught up too much in the razzmatazz which is online. You just want to find someone, you spend time with them. You seek knowledge, you read books, you do what you can, and naturally you'll start to flow towards where you need to go. I think that's a big issue sometimes in the beginning. People have this hamasa, which is like there's a lot of excitement that I'm going to do well, and then they start becoming combative with their parents, and they're saying, oh, you have to do this and you have to do that, and that does happen, right? It's like a burnout people go through. You just got to take it easy and know that the deen is yusr, the deen is ease, right? So don't make it too hard on yourself. Fulfill the obligations, definitely, but take it easy with yourself and slowly get into learning about the religion. And just keep yourselves around good people, good friends, meet them, stay away. I had a friend that, he was learning knowledge, and he had the bad friends with him, the wrong friends. And every time he'd fall and he would do something haram, and he said, I had to just leave them. Because I just had to completely leave them. And for 6 months I was isolated, I was alone. But then he started to, learn about the religion. MashaAllah, now he's a famous TikToker, Instagrammer, right? So he's teaching online and things like that. So I'm saying that, you have to take certain steps in your own life, and you have to maybe sacrifice a little bit, but don't be too hard on yourself. That's what I would say at the beginning.
And you mentioned something very important there, that, as we go on this journey, as we continue on the path, it should affect our character, our relationship with our family, and so on. It shouldn't be something that becomes a wedge between us and other people, or a sticking point. It can be actually that they start to appreciate actually you've been becoming better mannered from your classes, or spending more time with your parents, or being of service to those around you, such that they themselves want you to continue and encourage you to do so.
100%. I think, and that's the thing, is that the knowledge should be transforming your actions, right? Khatib Baghdadi, he has a book purely on the relationship between knowledge and action, right? And there's so many ahadith and statements which talk about how when there's a disconnect, it's a problem, right? Because it's supposed to spur you to doing good. And so I'd say to anyone that if you're finding that your children or people that are not really so religious, or they have a bad character and things like that, send them to classes of knowledge, and you'll see how they change. People will change, honestly. They'll change they'll learn about the rights of the parents. They'll learn about how to deal with people. They'll learn the sunnah of how to be patient and forbearance and rahmah. It's not just dry fiqh and aqidah. You're learning a whole ecosystem, a whole belief system which will transform your life, right? And so if you find there's people like that, just get them slowly, steadily to attend durus, encourage them, etc. And you'll see within months, they'll be so much better. And that's what I'm saying, is that if we can inculcate this across on the community level, you'll find that our dealings with each other will increase and will improve, not just between ourselves, but even with non-Muslims and people of other faiths, right? Because again, it teaches you rahmah. It teaches you mercy, that when you learn the religion, you learn the right of everything. That's why in the hadith that I mentioned before, that the student of knowledge, even the fish in the sea will make dua for the student of knowledge. Why? Because he learns the rights of even the fish in the sea, right? So they make dua for him, they make supplication for him. But some of the scholars said as well is that the learning of knowledge is in of itself something which is learning rahmah, right? And so you will learn how to be with people, you learn to have the right etiquettes. These are things which I think we're missing a bit, and I think it does come to that we're not emphasizing enough the importance of a basic foundational set of knowledge and skills that we need for every Muslim going forward. Yeah.
Jazakallah khair, Shaykh. And as a final point, then, something really that can make everything we've talked about, all the benefit, really holds it at stake is the intention, as we know, in every action that we take as Muslims. What should the intention of a student of knowledge be? What should their mindset look like as they continue on this journey?
So I think that of course, primarily you have to, when you're seeking knowledge, ensure that you're seeking knowledge for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's essentially it. I mean, Imam al-Ghazali, and we were teaching this in the masjid, in his book Bidayatul Hidayah, which is the beginning of guidance, he starts off from the beginning. He says, if you're seeking knowledge to kind of, to become better than the scholars in terms of try to argue with them, or to show that you're something special, or for any other reason apart from seeking Allah, then he goes, then you are devoid of barakah, right, essentially. And so it has to be purely for the sake of Allah, that you want him to be pleased subhanahu wa ta'ala, but also that you're ensuring that you are wanting to spread his religion for his sake, right? So it's not for anything, for fame and things like that. And it can happen, right? And he even talks about ulama su, and even evil scholars, people can have evil intentions, right, that they're having. So you have to have that. I think that the intention is primary for anything, and so one should strive to do it for the sake of Allah. And just a point that you mentioned that we talked about briefly is that, how do you become a strong student? And it reminds me of a saying of Imam Shafi. He says to, in one of, I think it's his diwan, he says, أخي لن تنالوا العلم إلا بستة, that you will not get knowledge except through 6, right? And we've heard this, isn't it? ذكاء وحرص واجتهاد وبلغة, which is essentially to have intelligence, to have the desire, the firm desire to learn, to be very kind of hardworking, and to have bulgha, which is sustenance, that you don't have to rely on other people, that you're able to look after yourself. And then he says that, to spend time suhbah مع العلماء صحبة الأستاذ, that spend time with the teacher. And then he says صحبة الأستاذ وطول الزمن, that he says that you need time, right? So these 6, subhanallah, is so succinct that if you can have these 6 things in order to, when you're learning knowledge, you will find that you will start to pick up something daily, weekly, monthly, and you will get to a stage where people will come to you and they'll ask you questions, right? And I was saying this before, that who is better than the one in this world that the people come to and ask, what does Allah want from me? There's no one better than that. If someone comes to you and says, how do I do this in this situation? How do I please Allah? What is the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ in this situation? There is no better role to have than to tell that person, this is what Allah and His Rasul wants from you. There's nothing better than that. And so if your intention is purely for the fact that I want to spread this deen so that the deen of Allah spreads, that the qawl and the aqwal and the sayings of the Rasul ﷺ spread throughout the land, there's nothing better than that. And so I think everyone has the capability to contribute to that discourse, whether it's in a kind of lower level or high level, but don't be those who don't have anything to offer. That's what I'd say.
Barakallahu feek, Ustad. I think wise words for us to end on. Jazakallah khair for your time today. Of course, there's plenty more to say. Perhaps we can have you on in future. But that's everything from us today. Jazakallah khair for joining us with the Al Ma'rifah podcast, and we hope to see you next time.